It was supposed to be just another school field trip, a chance to explore the history and architecture of a long-abandoned asylum on the outskirts of town. Our history teacher, Mr. Clark, was a bit of a local history buff, and he was excited to show us the place. The old asylum had been shut down decades ago, its dark history sealed behind rusted gates and crumbling walls. As the bus pulled up to the overgrown driveway, we all pressed our faces against the windows, eager to catch a glimpse of the infamous building. The asylum loomed ahead, its stone walls weathered by time, windows boarded up or broken. A shiver of anticipation ran through the group. There were rumors about this place, stories of ghostly apparitions and unsolved mysteries. Mr. Clark led us through the rusted gates, the sound of our footsteps echoing in the eerie silence. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the wind whispered through the broken windows, making the place feel alive, as if it was watching us. "Stay together," Mr. Clark warned as we entered the main building. "This place is old and dangerous. No wandering off." But as we began the tour, my curiosity got the better of me. The old asylum had always fascinated me, and I wanted to see more than just the safe, guided path. So, when no one was looking, I slipped away from the group and ventured down a narrow hallway that branched off from the main tour. The deeper I went, the darker and colder it became. The walls were lined with peeling paint, and the floor creaked beneath my feet. The hallway seemed to stretch on forever, leading me further away from the sounds of my classmates. But I couldn't turn back now, not when I was so close to discovering something hidden, something that had been forgotten. At the end of the hallway, I found a heavy wooden door, its surface scarred and weathered. It was slightly ajar, as if inviting me to enter. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was large and dimly lit by the few remaining windows that hadn't been boarded up. It looked like an old infirmary, with rusty bed frames and decaying mattresses scattered around. The air was thick with dust, and the silence was oppressive, broken only by the faint sound of dripping water. As I moved deeper into the room, I noticed something strange: a large, old-fashioned mirror standing in the corner. It was out of place in the otherwise stark and clinical surroundings, its ornate frame gleaming faintly in the dim light. I approached the mirror, drawn to it by a feeling I couldn't explain. As I stood in front of it, I felt a chill run down my spine. My reflection stared back at me, but something was wrong. The room behind me looked different in the mirror, as if the reflection was showing a different time, a different reality. I reached out to touch the mirror, and as my fingers brushed against the cold glass, I heard a whisper. Faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. "Help me." I jerked my hand back, my heart pounding. The reflection in the mirror began to shift, the room behind me fading away and being replaced by another scene. I saw patients, their faces twisted in agony, lying in the beds, their eyes hollow and empty. The room was filled with a palpable sense of despair and suffering. And then I saw her, a young girl no older than me, standing behind me in the reflection. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear. She was dressed in a hospital gown, her hair tangled and unkempt. She reached out toward me, her mouth moving silently, as if trying to speak. I spun around, but the room was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the girl was gone, but the sense of dread lingered. I backed away from the mirror, my mind racing. I needed to get out of there, to find my way back to the group, but the door I had entered through was no longer there. In its place was a solid wall, as if the room itself had shifted around me. Panic set in as I realized I was trapped. The air grew colder, and the whispers grew louder, filling the room with a cacophony of voices, all pleading, all desperate. The walls seemed to close in on me, and I felt as if the room was alive, feeding off my fear. I ran to the other side of the room, searching for an exit, but there was none. The mirror stood ominously in the corner, its surface now dark and reflective no longer. The voices swirled around me, a chorus of agony and despair, and I felt a pressure on my chest, as if something was trying to pull me into the darkness. And then, the mirror began to glow with a faint, eerie light. The surface shimmered, and the girl reappeared, her hand pressed against the glass. Her eyes were filled with terror, and she mouthed the words again, "Help me!" Desperation overtook me. I knew I had to do something, anything to escape the nightmare that was closing in on me. I grabbed a nearby piece of broken metal from one of the bed frames and swung it at the mirror with all my strength. The mirror shattered, the glass exploding outward in a shower of sharp fragments. The whispers ceased abruptly, replaced by an unnatural silence. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, my heart racing. The room around me began to fade, the walls dissolving into darkness. And then, everything went black. I woke up in the hospital, surrounded by worried faces. Mr. Clark, my parents, and a doctor. They told me that they had found me unconscious in one of the rooms, far from where the tour had been. They had been searching for me for hours, but I had been completely unresponsive, as if in a deep sleep. They didn't believe me when I tried to explain what had happened, chalking it up to stress and an overactive imagination. But I knew what I had seen, what I had experienced. The asylum had left its mark on me, a darkness that I couldn't shake. I could still hear the whispers sometimes, faint and distant, as if calling out to me from the shadows. And every time I looked into a mirror, I couldn't help but wonder if the girl was still there, trapped in that twisted reflection, waiting for someone to help her. I never went back to the asylum, but the memories of that day haunted me. The mirror, the girl, the voices, they were all burned into my mind, a reminder that some places are better left undisturbed, their secrets buried deep in the past. But I wasn't sure if I could ever truly escape them. Every school field trip has its stories, the kind passed down from one generation of students to the next. As a science teacher, I never put much stock in them. My job was to educate, not to entertain superstitions. So when we planned a trip to the nearby forest, I brushed off the rumors about the blood-stained woods as nothing more than local folklore. According to the legend, the forest was cursed. Centuries ago, a group of settlers had mysteriously vanished in those woods, their camp found abandoned with no signs of struggle, just pools of blood staining the ground. The townspeople believed the land was tainted, that the spirits of the settlers still roamed the woods, seeking revenge on anyone who dared to enter. Of course, I didn't believe any of it. The woods were just that, woods, a beautiful, dense forest perfect for teaching students about ecology and wildlife. So, I dismissed the warnings from the locals and led the students into the forest. The day started off well enough. The students were excited, chattering away as we hiked deeper into the woods. The air was crisp, the sun filtering through the canopy above. It was the perfect day for a field trip. But as we ventured further, the atmosphere began to change. The trees grew denser, the light dimmer. The sounds of birds and insects that had accompanied us at the start of the hike faded away, leaving an eerie silence in their place. The students, sensing the change, grew quieter, their earlier excitement replaced by a nervous energy. I tried to keep their spirits up, pointing out interesting plants and explaining the importance of the ecosystem, but even I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The forest felt different, as if we were being watched. Then we found it, a clearing in the middle of the woods, where the trees gave way to a patch of bare earth. In the center of the clearing stood a large, gnarled tree, its bark twisted and blackened. The ground around it was covered in strange markings, symbols carved into the dirt that I couldn't identify. The students gathered around the tree, whispering to each other, their eyes wide with fear. One of them, Sarah, pointed to the base of the tree. "Look, there's blood." I followed her gaze and felt my heart skip a beat. The ground was stained a deep, dark red, as if blood had seeped into the earth and refused to fade. I knelt down to examine it, but the soil was dry, the stain old. Yet, it looked fresh, as if the blood had been spilled only recently. "It's just rust," I said, trying to sound confident. "Probably from iron deposits in the soil." But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. There was no logical explanation for what we were seeing. We should have left then, but curiosity got the better of me. I decided to use the tree as a teaching moment, to show the students how folklore can grow around natural phenomena. I explained how people in the past might have seen the red-stained earth and, without understanding it, created a story to explain it. But as I spoke, the air grew colder, and a heavy fog began to roll in from the surrounding trees, obscuring the path we had taken. The students huddled closer together, their faces pale with fear. That's when we heard it, a low, guttural moan that echoed through the clearing. It was unlike anything I had ever heard, a sound that seemed to come from the very earth beneath our feet. The students screamed, and I felt a wave of panic rise in my chest. "We need to go," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Stay close, and don't wander off." We started back the way we had come, but the fog had thickened, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The moaning grew louder, more insistent, as if it was following us. The path that had been so clear before was now lost in the mist, and I struggled to find our way. The students began to cry, their fear palpable. I tried to reassure them, but the truth was, I was just as scared. The forest seemed to be closing in around us, the trees twisting into grotesque shapes in the fog. I could feel the weight of the legend pressing down on me, the sense that we had trespassed somewhere we didn't belong. Then we saw them, figures moving in the mist, just beyond the edge of our vision. They were tall, their forms distorted by the fog, but there was something familiar about them, something that made my blood run cold. They were dressed like the settlers from the legend, their clothes tattered and stained with blood. Their faces were pale, their eyes hollow and empty. They moved silently, gliding through the fog as they surrounded us. "We're leaving," I said, my voice trembling. "Now!" But it was too late. The figures closed in, their movements deliberate and slow, as if savoring our fear. The students clung to me, their cries growing more desperate as the figures drew nearer. I felt a hand brush against my arm, cold, clammy, and unmistakably real. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, the fog began to lift. The figures dissolved into the mist, the moaning faded, and the forest returned to its previous stillness. We were back on the path, the clearing and the tree now far behind us. I didn't waste any time. I herded the students back to the bus, not stopping until we were safely inside. As we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had been given a warning, that something in those woods didn't want us there. I reported the incident to the school, but they dismissed it as mass hysteria, a product of overactive imaginations and the power of suggestion. They said that the bloodstains we had seen were probably just iron oxide, and the figures were a result of the fog playing tricks on our minds. But I knew better. I had felt the cold hand, heard the moans, and seen the blood with my own eyes. Whatever we had encountered in those woods was real, and it had let us go only because we had left when we did. The students were shaken by the experience, and I could see the fear lingering in their eyes long after we had returned to school. They stopped talking about the trip, and the legend of the bloodstained woods became just another story to them, something to be whispered about in the safety of the classroom. But for me, the legend had become a reality. I never went back to those woods, and I warned anyone who would listen to stay away. Some places are cursed, their pasts too dark to be forgotten, and the bloodstained woods are one of them. I still hear the moaning in my dreams, and sometimes, when the fog rolls in, I see the figures standing just beyond the edge of the trees, waiting for those who dare to enter. It had been 10 years since that fateful day when our school field trip turned into a nightmare. Now, at 29, I found myself driving through the familiar roads of the small town I had avoided since then. The streets and buildings seemed unchanged, but for me, they were tainted with memories of terror. I was once an eager student, excited about our field trip to the ancient ruins, a site known for its historical significance. The place was rumored to be cursed, but we dismissed it as mere superstition. As we approached the ruins, the air grew heavy, and an inexplicable chill settled over us. The day began with typical enthusiasm. Our group of classmates explored the crumbling structures, taking notes and laughing. But soon the atmosphere shifted. Shadows seemed to move of their own accord, and the whispers of a curse grew louder. Despite our initial laughter, unease spread among us. Then, without warning, my friends started to disappear. It began with Sarah, who vanished into a narrow passageway. We called for her, but there was no response. One by one, the others followed, each disappearance more terrifying than the last. I tried to stay calm, but fear paralyzed me. The ruins seemed to come alive, swallowing my friends into its darkness. In the chaos, I managed to find a way out, but I was forever scarred by the memory of my friends' screams and the weight of their absence. Determined to confront the past and find answers, I returned to the ruins, bracing myself for whatever awaited me. The guilt of surviving while my friends were lost had haunted me ever since. It was time to face the place that had forever altered my life. The ruins stood before me as they had a decade ago, cold, ancient, and foreboding. The once vibrant colors of the stone were now dulled by age and neglect. The trees surrounding the site were twisted and skeletal, their branches reaching out like ghostly fingers. As I stepped into the ruins, a familiar sense of dread enveloped me. The air was thick and oppressive, carrying an unsettling silence that seemed to press down on me. The symbols etched into the walls, which I had barely noticed before, now glowed faintly with an eerie light. They seemed to pulse and shift, almost as if they were alive. I ventured deeper into the ruins, retracing the steps I had taken years earlier. The once comforting sounds of footsteps and laughter were replaced by an eerie quiet. Then the whispers began, soft at first, like distant echoes. They grew louder, coalescing into the voices of my lost friends. The whispers turned into a cacophony of cries, overlapping and growing more frantic. I could hear Sarah's voice pleading for help, James's voice filled with anger, and Emily's voice trembling with fear. The sounds were disorienting, coming from every direction but revealing nothing. Panic surged through me as I tried to locate the source of the voices, but the darkness seemed to close in tighter with each passing moment. In a desperate attempt to find answers, I reached out and touched the glowing symbols on the walls. A jolt of energy surged through me, and the world around me seemed to dissolve. I was pulled into a nightmarish vision, a realm of darkness where the air was heavy and suffocating. I found myself in a dark, oppressive space, a void that seemed to stretch on endlessly. The air was filled with the stench of decay, and the ground beneath me was cold and damp. I could barely move, as if invisible chains bound me to the spot. The faces of my friends emerged from the shadows, pale, gaunt, their eyes hollow and accusing. They moved in eerie unison, their voices overlapping in a haunting chorus. Their accusations pierced through me, blaming me for their fate, for not saving them from the darkness that had claimed them. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The ruins were not just a site but a prison for lost souls, including my friends. The symbols on the walls were part of an ancient curse that trapped the souls of those who had been lost within the ruins. I was no longer merely a visitor. I was a part of this eternal prison, bound by the same curse that held my friends captive. The weight of their anger and despair was overwhelming. Their voices grew louder, more distorted, blending into a cacophony of torment. I felt as though I was being pulled into their anguish, my own fear and guilt merging with theirs. The darkness pressed in from all sides, and I could see no way to escape. The days that followed were a blur of restless nights and haunted thoughts. The voices of my friends continued to torment me, a constant reminder of the guilt I carried. I knew I had to return to the ruins, not just to confront the past, but to face my own fate. Returning to the central chamber, I found the atmosphere more oppressive than ever. The symbols on the walls glowed with a fierce, unnatural light, and the air crackled with an ominous energy. The ruins seemed to have awakened, ready to claim their next victim. I stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by the spirits of my friends. They reached out to me, their faces filled with a mix of sorrow and expectation. I felt a strange sense of acceptance, a resignation to the fate that awaited me. The guilt and fear that had tormented me for years seemed to dissolve in the presence of the spirits. With a final, shuddering breath, I allowed myself to be enveloped by the darkness. The voices grew silent, and the weight of the past lifted as I joined my friends in their eternal prison. The ruins had claimed me, and the echoes of the past were finally silenced. The ruins stood silent once more, their curse complete, as they waited for the next soul to wander into their grasp.